T.S. Eliot Prize Tour will offer a fantastic opportunity to see 36 poets reading across the country in different venues. They're the best poets of their generation. They're being shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize over the last few years, and they'll be joined by celebrated local poets.
We're really trying to be as inclusive as possible and allow audiences who may not normally come to a T.S. Eliot Prize reading in London to see what we think is the best poetry in this country.
We really wanted to represent poetry in all its forms and all its voices. So we have past winners in there, but we do have local poets and emerging voices. So the whole range is represented. It's just such a great opportunity to take poetry out of London.
It's very good to be here in Glasgow, city where I grew up, and reading under the banner of T.S. Eliot. I think it was a great thing that the Poetry Book Society set up the T.S. Eliot Prize, and that it's still going, and that it's absolutely true to Eliot in his own support for younger poets. And wonderful that really nearly 50 years after his death, his name is still associated with support for contemporary poetry. I like to write poems that are sometimes quiet and sometimes noisy. So I just like some sense of variety, both in readings and in books. St George o' Osborne to his richt, and Sam Cam by his side. Dave Hart has ridden through the nicht to flatter Scotland's pride. He sings the joys o' Union lang and loud through shitty weather. His een are bricht, his voice is strang, we're better aff thegither. Oh, Dave Hart man, beware the wiles of slippery smart Alex, whose henchfolk maybe seem o' smiles, but soon like Gallic Daleks. Oh, Dave Hart, will ye muster men at Cumnock or Port Seaton? Nay, every battle's won ye ken on the playing fields o' Eton. The paps o' Jura are your ain, though nae the chaps o' Govan. The faithful met in Bearsden's reign look awful like a coven. Dave Hart, your mighty sword aloft shines like a nuclear weapon. But as ye gang by Coo and Croft, tak tent of what ye step on. Welcome to Scotland, as is said by yon old guy in Skyfall. Our leaders thrawn and overfed, our sceneries an eyeful. For all the cabinets you've chaired, trust neither man nor woman. We aren't scared, we're just prepared. The Camerons are coming.
It feels wonderful to be invited on the tour. First of all, because I haven't actually heard Kathleen Jamie or Robert Crawford read, so me being in the room, I get to hear them read. It's so good an idea that you wonder, why hasn't it happened before? Do you know they have all these great poets going all over the country? It gives loads of people from all over Britain an opportunity to see these poets, and because there are so many good poets that have been shortlisted and won the prize, I mean, it's only beneficial to anybody that's like poetry to hear them.
We are. Gie me an eeny meeny macrack I don't like a sugar I lollipop and take a sear head. Oh, here we laugh, or just say aye with inky pinky pie, skiddly weedly waddly wee riggy doo, away you go. We are inside the kick and crunch of colour, where autumn's taken its dagger and opened up a vein so the pavements aren't so grey, our heartbeats are not so bleak. And this kiss means more than warmth and blood.
I guess it's probably the highlight of the poetry year, isn't it? And it falls early in the year, so after Christmas is done, after New Year's done, we've got the T.S. Eliot to look forward to.
Mindville Bridge, the wines that spawned us, those hemmed-in, ramshackle tenements, taller, it seemed, every year. Collar herring, on her rags, on the mountain stands a lady. What a racket! Coal smoke, midden reek, filthy, needless to mention. or 2 old hives heaped high either side of the river, crammed with the living, with the dead beat, and joined by that sandstone ligature. Did you ever notice how walking out over the water made us more human? Men became gracious, women unfolded their arms from their breasts, and where else could children, beggars, any one of us, pause and look up at the sky? And that river, forever bearing its breeze to the sea like a rustic bride, scented now with blossom, now with pine sap. But what was the sea to us then? What was a mountain? Yes, us, me and you, that bridge, long ago demolished, where we first met.
Yeah, to be involved in this tour is strange. I feel somewhat like an interloper. I mean, of course, it's such an amazing prize. I mean, the shortlist every year is just represents the best poets in Britain. So to be asked to read in that kind of company is very humbling and it's an honor.
So after the long journey of 28,000 rubber ducks, to them who knew to break free from dark hold of ships, who trusted their bodies instead to the Atlantic, to them who scorned the limits of bathtubs, who refused to join any course of rub-a-dub, to them who've always known their own high tunes, who have hitched rides on the manacled backs of blues, who have been sailing now since 1992, to them who pass in squeakless silence over wrecks of ships, who float in and out of salty vortexes, to them who grace the shores of hot and frozen continents and instruct us yearly on the movement of currents, to those bright yellow dots that float like spots of praise. Hail.
I think the T.S. Eliot Prize coming out of London is really important. I think that rural areas really need to see it just as much. I don't see why it should just stay in London. It's a good turnout tonight, and I think everyone really enjoyed it, so it worked.
I thought it was lovely. It was really different from what I usually do. And it was really interesting as well. It's the first time I've ever seen poetry live, like being read by the poet. And it was really nice seeing the people who actually write the poetry and not just seeing it as like words in a book. So I really enjoyed it.
I've never read in Halifax before, but I've visited in the past. The first poetry I went to, I took some time. I was actually just after I'd been working in the city. I was working in the computer industry in those days. And I took some time off. I turned up at a reading at the South Bank Centre. But my response was more to the audience, because I sat down in my business suit with my raincoat and my briefcase, and the people sitting next to me moved away 2 places. So they thought they might be contaminated by this guy. Or maybe I was a spy from the other side. This is called Power Cut with Cheval Mirror, homage to Thomas Hardy. You'll hear the Hardy echoes in the poem. For my sons. You woke up in the dark and came to find me. A sickle moon shedding its light in a narrow hall, that give in the floorboards, foot-worn and hollowed and thin. But you weren't afraid so much as confused, the doorwells occupied all of a sudden by something new, the feel of the house unfamiliar, its fabric wedded to the land around us, seeing eyes where we were blind. Isn't there a hint of thou to find in how the light reveals us all as wisps of distance in the mirror, when the candle wavers for a moment and we're lost in depths of field, a newfound history of presence in the dark, itself unseeing, barely the ghost you feared or hoped for, just the long familiar things made strange, as if you'd turn to find your bearings, home as love and narrative, while just this once, the known world looks away.
Eliot readings, yes, they're fun. They're occasions, they're moments of celebration. I've noticed that the audiences are unusually excited at the beginning and generally even more excited at the end of a reading. In my early days as a poet, it was very uncommon to find an audience of more than about 10 people at a poetry reading. Now people consider it a good night out. Jane Steep, a poet still in search of her voice, is on the night bus heading home from her shift at Sunny's Kebab and Pizza restaurant. She has a book of poems in her bag, but is too tired, too angry as well to get it out. She hates her job. She has to leave it. The journey home itself is a horror. To brave it, she must disregard all other passengers on the bus and stare straight ahead, even while the ghoul on her left is giving her the odd shove with his elbow and a drunk at the back is aiming grimaces her way. But she must be strong. Only just out of uni, and everything's gone wrong, she thinks, recoiling as some hulking half-wit lurches into her. She uses her basketwork bag as a flimsy shield, then feels for her purse. Still there, thank heaven, could have been a close shave. The bus dawdles on towards Camberwell. Tonight, her head's in a worse than usual whirl, and her nerves, never less than highly strung, are jangling like a harpsichord, or because the chef, Kurdish Dave, who has fallen into the loutish habit of pinching her bottom each time she passes, finally drove her to answer back, hitting him in the face with a catering pack of frozen chips.
I was actually in my car driving to Scotland when I cheekily had a look at my phone and I saw an email from the PBS asking me to read at the T.S. Eliot Prize Tour. And I thought that they'd sent the email to me by mistake or something. But I was very pleased to have been asked, and yeah, very happy to be here. There is no dictionary for my father's language. His dialect, for a start, is difficult to name. Even this taxi driver who talks it lacks the knowledge. Some say it's Bahari, he'll speak. Others, Batwari, or Bahari Batwari. Too earthy and scriptless to find a home in books, this mountain speech is a low language, ours. No good. You should learn speak Urdu. I'm getting the runaround. Whatever it is, this talk, going back, did once have a script. Landa, in the reign of the Buddhists. So, was Dad's speech some kind of Dogri? Is it Kashmiri, Mirpuri? The differences are lost on me. I'm told it's part way towards Punjabi, but what that tongue would call Tuarda, Dad would agree was Tosanda, yours. Truly, though there are many dictionaries for the tongue I speak, it's the close-by things I'm lost to say, things as pulsed and present as the back of this hand, never mind stumbling towards some higher plane, and, either way, even at the rare moment I get towards, or, thank God, even getting to my point, I can't put into words where I've arrived.
I'm really delighted to be involved in the T.S. Eliot Prize Anniversary Tour because it's not automatic and because I love what the prize stands for. I love that it's about poets reading other poets' books. I love the kind of the generosity of it. You know, there are 10 people shortlisted. I just like the seriousness of it. And it's a great idea to tour. You know, too much of British poetry is London-centric, even though so many of our best poets don't live and work in London.
I love paths cut through corn, through grass and meadowsweet, that clean opening, as if the path were a pattern for life, abstract and true, as if form were a truth about you. And I love to walk the new swathe where stalks start up from the exact gold dark, as I reach down to touch each cornhead with a fingertip. It makes me think of Helena, Empress Mother of Constantine, gambling on the natural justice that gods reward faithfulness. Everything good still waits in the next field. The best is yet to come, and it smells of warm earth crazed by sun, of seed heads husked against my thumb. Do you remember when we walked at Eastleach? Did you see me stoop and grow strange to myself, like the rows of wheat, like shaking bells of husk?
I think the tour is a great thing because it's getting poetry to places where there's not enough of it, and I'd say West Yorkshire was one of those places. So it feels like a star event, and it was lovely to hear it was on and to be able to come.
Poetry has the luxury of being able to meet the people, because if it was Salman Rushdie or J.K. Rowling, you'd never be able to get up to meet them, but poetry has no airs and graces.
The T.S. Eliot tour has taken us all around the country. We've been to Glasgow, we've been to Norwich, we've been to Ludlow, Portsmouth, Winchester, Oldham, Halifax, and here we are now in Sheffield.
It's a great pleasure for me to be returning to Sheffield, where I taught at Sheffield Hallam University for several years and have read many times. It's always a pleasure to read here. This is a very well-informed, committed audience who know their stuff, which tends to be true of audiences in the major centres throughout the north, Sheffield, Leeds, Manchester, Newcastle and so on, where there has always been a very powerful poetry culture and poetry community, surviving in some ways quite unconcerned with the things that preoccupy London, offering an alternative view and often being imaginatively first off the mark. London can seem a bit provincial in comparison. We're always being told that poetry is unfashionable, but fashion is no judgment of value, it seems to me. Poetry goes on being written in a serious way and read by the like-minded and by people who come afresh to it in each generation. It is unlikely ever to sell by the millions of copies, but that's not really the point. The point is to tend to the health of the imagination and the language, which is what poetry does better than any other literary form, and I would argue probably better than most other art forms as well. So poetry is not some kind of unfortunate relative in the cultural family, but poetry is the home of all verbal culture. A god, long since retired to the seaside, checks the post and tuts at the barometer, some dirty weather in the offing. Freighters in the channel battened down, the green wave walls remote and terrifying as his youth. He rereads Hornblower in bed. He never sleeps. An egg, please, and the telegraph. His constitutional, the bandstand, out along the pier, the wintry courtesies accorded others of his solitary kind. Then, afternoon, no weather worth the name. The day extends towards whatever it extends towards forever, and the god applies himself once more to 13 down. The only word that rhymes with breath, but it's no good.
It was a wonderful moment when I got the call that I'd been shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize, because, well, I couldn't quite believe it really. It did feel like winning the lottery. It's been a prize that over the years I'd always sort of kept my eye on. It's one of those moments in the year when there's a real buzz around poetry, and to think that if somebody had said 10 years ago, oh, you'll be shortlisted, I just wouldn't have believed them. One evening I came back home and everything was just as I'd left it, except the bowls gleamed with a new knowledge. The cat wore his yellow gaze like a mask. and I sensed the house had been visited, wings unfurling like ferns in the quiet air. I was blessed with children anyway. I shook my life out like a cloth. And perhaps there is a purpose, after all, in not being chosen. The minute my clock has never regained, sunlight in the guest room, climbing its ladder of dust.
I think I hold Sheffield and the surrounding area entirely responsible for my first book, and I think I didn't necessarily realise quite how much place was important to my writing, even sometimes those poems that I didn't particularly think were inspired by or connected to place, how deeply it kind of runs through most of my work. I think I've always felt very much that I get my sense of identity from this part of the world and from living here, particularly the landscape, and yeah, the area where I live now, Halifax, which is just outside Sheffield. And I moved back here a few years ago, and I think it really hit me then that so much of what makes me happy is all connected to Sheffield and to what's around it. So it's no wonder really that pervades my work so much. The lawn was freezing over, but the air stayed empty, and I wondered how the Inuit would name this waiting. Our radio playing to itself in the bathroom, the sound from the street of ice cream vans out of season, in this town where we don't have 22 words for anything, where I learned the name for artificial hills, the bridge where a man was felled by bricks in the strike. From the window, I watch the sky as it starts to fill. In the kitchen, Dad sifts flour, still panning for something.
I think it's a cultural form that's still viable, that people might think only exists under glass or in some dusty room somewhere. And it isn't, it's very much alive, it's very vibrant. And it's great to hear the poets read their own work, I think, and in that way it's kind of like a gig, but without the instruments, you know. And there'll be two kinds of audience member, I think. There'll be the kind of audience member who's already a bit familiar with the poetry, perhaps, and it's a treat for them to hear it being read by the author. And then there's the completely undecided constituency who I'd appeal to and say, check it out, it is a viable cultural form, just in the same way as popular music or opera or any other mode of performance. Adults, I'd look up to them looming on street corners or down on them at night through my bedroom blinds, crashing home from the Labour Club, mad drunk. After a while I decided they must be unhappy. And this didn't tally at all with my view of their world. Adults could float through days, sole sovereigns of everything around them, could pass through walls of childish silence or just take off in the sunbeam. So why did I find them at home times slumped in their chairs or throwing their tea up the wall? Why did they cry on their own downstairs with the whole house listening in, or plead softly to people who weren't even there? You think you know all the answers at that age. You can't wait to grow up and sort them out, then go to live in Mayfair or Singapore, wear a smoking jacket and drink gin slings all day like real writers do. Thanks very much.
Helping to run the T.S. Eliot Prize Tour has been a real privilege. I've been able to see some of the poets that are at the top of their game read their poems, share their poems with audiences who maybe haven't been able to see them before. So it's been a real privilege, and it's been amazing, really, and lots of fun.
Everything has been so varied. Each night we've had 3 or 4, mostly 4, different poets. And many of the audiences have come to see one particular poet, and then they've found that they enjoyed the other poets as well. And some of them have never been to a poetry reading before, but I'm sure they're going to come again.